what really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 3. The phone lines are open again, 800-313-9443. We've got 2 callers already waiting on the line. Before we get to them, though, they've just had a pretty big earthquake just off Valparaiso, Chile, in the ocean there, and we're sort of under an alert here in Hawaii for a possible tsunami, and hopefully that'll firm up in the very near future. All righty, let's see. Bob in Las Vegas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I just returned from a wonderful country that has no military. The media, the politicians don't talk about the next country to be invaded. There's no John McCain, Lindsey Graham, and Maxine Waters. I was in Costa Rica, and now I'm back in the U.S., and I'm miserable. I want to say this. I was in Costa Rica when this whole missile strike happened, and I've been listening to your show. I was listening to it down there, and I don't care whether Trump was, if he was threatened, if he was blackmailed. He's become a figurehead. It's become a joke. Yes. And I'd have more respect for the man if he just resigned. Because, I heard a funny thing on Crosstalk. They said this is the first transgender presidency. Donald Trump has become Hillary Clinton.
I wonder where they heard that one from.
Yeah. Did you say it before?
I said it at the top of the show.
Okay, sorry. But he's become a figurehead. And I listened to some of your callers, and it seems like they're just grasping on to their hope that, Trump is the real deal. He's not. Get over it. The guy, he's a con man. I was conned. I admit it. And one good thing was it did show the deep state, that we have a deep state in this country. He's a con man. All he's interested in doing, according to Paul Craig Roberts, is sell things with his name on it and make deals with China. Apparently, he made a deal with China, a trademark deal. An excellent interview with Gerald Celente on Jeff Rance, and they go through a laundry list of Trump's betrayals. So the guy is he's part of the problem. He's not the solution. And then one other thing, Tom from Florida talks about, Trump is deporting all these guys from MS-13. Hey, where's the proof, Tom? I mean, who told you that? The government? The corporate, the mainstream media? How do we know these MS-13 guys who might be in league with the CIA? How do we know these guys are being deported?
No,
I don't believe
we really don't. And, just the other day there was a story saying that MS-13, their numbers are surging here in the United States. Part of it is the open borders. Part of it is they're recruiting within the inner cities, where they're finding all these very angry, disenfranchised people who are willing to sign on with a gang because they don't see any other possible avenue to any kind of a comfortable lifestyle. That's really where that comes from. Now, as far as Donald Trump is concerned, and again, I don't really care how it came about. I'm looking at the end result. I think Donald Trump originally meant well, but I think he has been co-opted by that deep state. It certainly appears that a lot of these policy decisions are being made by other people around him. He's unfortunately been, his White House is infiltrated with all these neocons, and we know how much the neocons love war as long as somebody else pays for them and dies in them. And that's really the problem right there. And I could be wrong, but I'm very disappointed in Donald Trump. And it may be because he was naive coming into Washington, D.C., which was my concern going all the way back to the original campaign.
Yeah, but Mike, I mean, we're told he's smart, he's intelligent. He was a graduate of Penn. He's street smart. We hear that all the time from Robert David Steele. How could he be so naive? I mean, he plays the political game. He was involved in this game for decades. Didn't he know what he was getting into?
Rob, Donald Trump has played the business game, and yes, there's a little bit of politics in it, but the politics inside Washington, D.C. Is a whole different animal. It's ruthless, vicious. It involves assassination, blackmail. We're hearing rumors that apparently when Trump was down on Epstein's Island, that they got video on him, which, if it were made public, would absolutely destroy his reputation. That could be what's going on. We're hearing another rumor that he's simply been told by the leadership of Congress, the war agenda will move forward All you can decide is if you're going to remain president or not, because if you refuse to follow the war agenda, we're going to find some way to get rid of you. And there's already this attempt to file a new law that would change the definitions of the 25th Amendment to allow past presidents and vice presidents to pass judgment on the current president if they're fit for office, which is very dangerous because it basically means it gives a veto to somebody like an Obama over anybody who refuses to carry forward on his agenda. And the whole idea of having a new president every 4 or 8 years is to get new agendas and new thinking in there, not merely reinforce the status quo. But again, in the long run, it doesn't matter how it happened. What matters is that Trump has been somehow brought to heel to the war agenda. And it basically means, as John F. Kennedy said, peaceful revolution has been made impossible in this country, and that leaves a very, very ugly alternative.
Well, I just wanted to say this. I mean, he may have dealt in the business side of the political game, but, I mean, he has the objective example of JFK. I mean, does he believe the Warren Commission? I mean, it just makes me wonder about this guy. I mean, he had to know what he was getting into. He just, I don't know. And then I said way back a few months ago, Mike, that we live in the perfect dictatorship. And you're right, it's not the perfect dictatorship because more and more people are seeing it for what it is, but we live in a dictatorship nonetheless.
No question. No question about that at all. And, of course, as we like to say over at our online store on one of the coffee mugs, the fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force them to act like one where everybody can see it, and we seem to be getting into that particular phase. Again, I think the lesson we're taking out of the 2016 election is that it doesn't really matter who is in that Oval Office. The national policy is being dictated from outside. We, the American people, did not get the direction of the nation we voted for, and we have every right to say it's time for a cash for clunkers law for the government itself, to basically take our bloated, non-working, impossible-to-control government over to the junkyard, put it in a little cruncher, turn it into a steel coffee table, and we all get a $50,000 check to go out and buy a smaller, more efficient, more easy-to-control government.
Yeah, Mike, you may have said it, you and Claire, you may have said it in jest, who knows, you're seeking political asylum in Russia. I would take it in a second, and I would renounce my citizenship. I'm very close to renouncing my citizenship and moving to Costa Rica.
Well, again, Claire, the problem Claire and I have is we don't have the money to go anywhere, or we'd be on the mainland. But yeah, if some other less warlike government were to offer Claire and I asylum, we would seriously consider it.
All right, well, Mike, thank you so much. Thanks for all you do.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. And before we take any more phone calls, we brought this issue up last week. It's from the realm of political correctness. And it's an article. It's coming out of LouRockwell.com. Transgenders threaten female sports. And they're starting to talk about all these athletic events that are being dominated by women who used to be men. And they've had the surgery and the hormone treatments, but they still have the extra muscle mass that men genetically have. Because if you test their DNA, they're still male. Doesn't matter what's been cut off or what's been altered with various chemicals in their DNA, they are still male. And they're talking about how these women who used to be men are starting to basically sweep these female sports. The real biological women can't compete. They can't keep up. If you want, let's have a third division, okay, for the transgenders. But it is not fair for a woman who used to be a man to be seen as competing on an equal footing with the real biological females. And this whole thing about gender, they're back out there trying to get you confused about what restroom you're going to use. Over on the Bill Nye show, he's out there saying sexuality is a spectrum. Just do what feels right. Harvard is telling their students gender can actually change from day to day. Now, I'm almost 65 years old, and not once in all that time have I ever been anything other than male. It just doesn't happen. All right, back to the phones. Rob in Chicago, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, first off, I agree with you on that trans stuff. That they're still just trying to water down humanity to lose its history of what it was. And on the other gentleman before, you know, talking about this country, and everybody thought that keeping Hillary out or getting Hillary in there was actually going to cause the final takeover of our country. But, you know, unfortunately what's coming to light is it was already taken over. It's just it's kind of like whose name's on the deed, you know. That's really, it's just a dog and pony show. And, I read a couple articles over the weekend, and I wanted to ask you to verify them. Trey Gowdy's 2 investigators were rumored to have been disappeared in Arkansas. They were going to investigate the Clinton Library and the residents there. Well, they apparently, according to one article today, they found their bodies in a shallow grave 100 miles away. I don't know. I haven't seen anything anywhere else, and I figure you're probably as good as I can get to verify something about Trey. And that he's also under marshal. Federal marshals are protecting him and his family because of the death threat.
Well, unfortunately, I have not been able to find anything to support the story, and it all tracks back to a website I know puts out hoax news. And that is something in this war between the corporate media and the independent media. Somebody is paying to set up dozens and dozens of supposed news websites that pour out all kinds of junk story so the corporate media can point to them and say, see, you can't trust the independent media. Look, they're making up all these silly things here, and so you should come on back and watch our TV networks. It's called poisoning the well. It's a propaganda trick, and you need to be aware. And that's why if we follow the basic rules of honest journalism, multiple sources, we're going to stay out of trouble. And again, does it make sense? Look for what should be there and isn't. And obviously, if 2 of Trey Gowdy's investigators had gone missing and turned up dead, we would see Trey Gowdy on the news right now screaming about it.
Hopefully. And that's, again, I get back to how taken over we are. And I agree with you. That's why I was trying to find another source, and I couldn't. And, unfortunately, with what's going on in our country, we can't trust anything coming out of the government. And, we do have to prepare for that final, challenge that will be the ultimate survival challenge, I'll call it.
Yeah.
Once everything goes sideways. So, and unfortunately, we just don't know which way it's going to go. Is it going to be a nuke war? Is it going to be an EMP?
Or an economic collapse. Or an economic collapse. Well, personally, my best outcome is for the U.S. government in Washington, D.C. to collapse the way the Soviet Union did, because that is going to result in the fewest number of deaths. Exactly.
I completely agree. I say I'm begging and praying for a financial collapse. And, the only one thing that I do see, and you may or may not agree, they keep talking about this aircraft carrier being able to be sunk by Kim Jong-un, and they are going to need one wicked false flag to start this thing with whoever it is, and they could do that and blame it on the Iranians, and they could just incinerate one of our aircraft carriers. And next thing you know, it's off to the races. And they would have no shame at doing that.
No, they wouldn't. But frankly, if you were going to sacrifice a carrier, use the USS Ronald Reagan, because that thing is still radioactive from Fukushima. They don't need to sink an entire carrier. They could sink one of the auxiliaries and claim the captain heroically sacrificed himself and his ship to protect the carrier and blame it on North Korea. And don't forget, they tried to frame North Korea for sinking a South Korean ship some years ago. And they made a big deal about they hauled the torpedo up from the floor of the ocean, and here's a blueprint of the torpedo the North Koreans used, and as it turned out, anybody looking closely at it could see they were not the same weapon. So, yeah, they could try that again, and or they could set off a nuke someplace to get war with Iran going. But it looks to me like North Korea is going to be the next one they need to get going. And, yeah, a false flag, firing a missile off saying, oh, my goodness, it's North Korea, as much as sinking a ship and sacrificing it and saying it was North Korea, they're capable of doing anything.
Well, in case something ever does happen, Michael, I do thank you for your patriotic work that you've done. And none of us knows the day and time, but hopefully you and I and our children, get to make it through to the other side to see the restart of the real country again, the real world. That's all I have to say. I mean, it's just very bothersome with 4 young daughters, and all they are looking forward to is their life and families, and I'm sitting here in the background watching the pieces of the puzzle fall into place that's going to stop that. So it just turns my stomach.
Yeah, I understand. I come from a family. In fact, I'm living right now in a neighborhood where there's lots and lots of new little children, and I keep looking up at them and saying, "What a horrible, horrible world we are leaving to these children to have to grow up into." And it's ugly out there. Anyway, Rob, I'm going to let you go here. We're going to take another phone call. Peter in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I got a couple things I wanted to point out. I know you already talked about Korea talking about taking control of its own defense.
That's the leading presidential candidate saying that.
Yeah, you know what? That signals. Remember, Turkey is basically out of our orbit. They've just announced that they want to buy the S-400s. The Philippines, Duterte is trying to chart a course that's his own course and not the U.S. And now you see that ISIS is making attacks in the Philippines.
Yes.
And also the other day, today maybe, a former Israeli defense minister admitted that Israel and ISIS are allies and have been. So there's a whole lot of things happening. People are leaving our orbit. Our empire is just collapsing, Mike.
Yeah, it really is. They're leaving our orbit economically, militarily, and unfortunately, I think that has only encouraged the war hawks to just hit that accelerator and just try and ram this war agenda through as quickly as they can, because they know opposition to all of the war is continuing to build, not just in the people of the United States, but the people all over the world.
If Mike, if Marie Le Pen wins in France, it's like totally over. There goes NATO. There's a whole lot of things that will end then.
Well, I'm expecting there to be massive election fraud in the second-round French elections. Apparently, a lot of people thought that Fillon was going to displace Le Pen for that second slot, and he didn't. It was a very poor showing. But we'll see what happens 2 weeks from now. But just like we saw up in Norway, like we saw with Brexit, like we saw with Nigel Farage, the European Union is not above rigging elections to keep the sovereigntists, the populists, the nationalists out of power.
One more thing, Mike. I know you talked about it last week, but when Trump's position on Iran, saying against the Iran nuclear deal, and where he came out and said, well, they're complying. First of all, they're not complying. But then he said, oh, they are complying, but not with the spirit. It's like they're living up to the agreement, but they're just not smiling when they do it or something.
It is that absurd.
It's ridiculous. How's anybody ever going to strike a deal with us?
They'd be idiots to do so. I mean, look at all the deals the U.S. government is breaking with everybody all over the world. Anybody who trusts the United States right now shouldn't be holding office. We are completely untrustworthy. Our government is completely untrustworthy. You're trustworthy, I'm trustworthy. Ordinary Americans are decent, ethical, moral people. It is the government that is the problem. And I got chastised by another caller saying it's time to establish a big black line between what the government is doing and what the American people are doing, because we shouldn't conflate the two. And that's absolutely true. It's the government that's the issue, not the American people. We have to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Peter, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Finishing up with the political correctness theme. And we talked about this morning on the Richie Allen Show. Oxford University has come on out declaring that avoiding making eye contact or asking where someone is from are signs of racism. No, they aren't. Sometimes when I'm thinking, I don't make eye contact with anybody. I just sort of watch the ground in front of me. And people making conversation will just say, where are you from? I'm originally from Boston. It's not racist to say that. But they're really pushing this PC nonsense as hard as they can. All right, going on back to the phones. Glenn in Philadelphia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Hey, you're really onto something. I think an asylum would be like the perfect place for you in any country.
Well,
not so much Claire, though.
Well, come on. I'm not leaving without her. Don't be ridiculous.
I'm finding it hard to believe that they're turning you away. I would just.
We haven't actually asked anybody. It was just an off-the-cuff comment the other day. Although we've always wanted to see the Hermitage, and I'm sure I could be of benefit to Russia's motion picture industry because I'm up to date on the latest CGI stuff. But it was just an off-the-cuff comment. We haven't actually applied to anybody for asylum. Frankly, if we can get the money, we do want to get back to the mainland before we have a mushroom cloud nicely framed in my office window here.
No. I didn't say asylum. I said an asylum. Anyway, but there's...
Oh, I see. I didn't get the joke. I didn't get the joke. Okay.
But not so much Claire.
Well, they can't lock me up, but if I was already in, I'd have a heck of a time getting back out.
Exactly. Hey, no kidding. I've worked in such facilities, and you make sure you do not leave your ID on the other side of the door.
When I was younger and I was a magician, I actually volunteered at a mental hospital. Go out there and do balloon animals and magic shows and everything. So I got to see and work with a lot of those people, and some of them, very clearly damaged individuals, and I felt really sorry for them. And
others can do quite well, and then there's unfortunately the recidivism where the people do better inside and then go out. It's family support structure is huge. Whether or not they have supports outside makes a big difference. But I wanted to say something about dictatorship. I'm going to respectfully disagree about the idea of dictatorship. I'm going to say it's worse than that. It's totalitarian oligarchy.
Okay,
because
I'll go with that.
The charismatic, the leaders come and go. The institutions that are being the puppet masters continue, and nobody even knows their names a lot of times, or their names are less known,
Well, Abraham Lincoln warned us that the creation of a corporation was essentially creating an immortal entity that could never die. All it could do was continue to acquire wealth until that wealth became a threat to the governing principles of the nation. And Lincoln certainly had that one right.
Absolutely. One last thing before I go. Anybody said anything about potential for ongoing problems with the Oroville Dam as the spring-summer thaw continues?
Yeah, there's been some concern expressed about that, all they can do is wait and see. There really isn't much of anything that they can do. They're trying to repair as much of the dam as possible before the spring thaw, which thankfully is coming late and gives them a little bit more time. But again, Oroville is hardly the only dam in the United States that has been suffering from neglect. And yeah, we could see some major problems this spring.
Yeah, exactly. Just curious. All right, thank you, Mike. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to start with Chuck in Texas. Chuck, I'm probably going to have to take you through the next commercial break. What is on your mind?
Well, back to the poisoning the well. There's another one out there being spread around the Internet about Trey Gowdy. There's this guy who supposedly died of a heart attack, blah, blah, blah. Johnston Wilson McGill.
Mm-hmm.
And he supposedly died before, the day before he was supposed to testify. It's a total bogus story. The man doesn't even exist. I tried to find him on the Internet.
Yeah, there's a lot of that out there. Yeah, they're trying to junk up the independent media with stories that can be easily discredited as an attack on our credibility. So we have to be extraordinarily careful and think these things through. All right, Chuck, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. Another phone call when we come on back, and then we're going to close the lines and do some more news. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to take one more phone call, then we're going to close the lines for a while. Mike in Maryland, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, if you haven't heard about it, I thought I'd bring your attention to Operation Gotham Shield. The U.S. government to simulate nuclear blast over Manhattan. Have you heard about that?
Oh, yeah. In fact, we've had a couple of articles about it up at whatreallyhappened.com. And obviously a lot of people are very concerned about the fact that every time there's been a false flag attack of some kind, there is usually a drill of some kind in parallel with it to mask, the obvious pre-preparation that has to go into it. There was a FEMA drill in New York the night before 9/11. There was a security drill going on in Boston ahead of the marathon bombing. The same thing over at London during the 7/7/2 bombing. And so a lot of people are wondering, especially with this rush to war and this need for a horrendous false flag, is this another potential setup? And what is really interesting is the size of the detonation they're planning for, 10 kilotons, happens to match exactly the largest weapon North Korea has tested to date. The drill is not using the yields of weapons from Russia or China. And of course, whatever Iran is going to be accused of having, nobody has any idea what yield would be there as well. But it's very, very concerning that they're going to use New York again, potentially for another false flag. Those poor New Yorkers have suffered enough.
Well, and there's a couple of short paragraphs, but on April 8th, this is from Zero Hedge, which I think is a reliable source.
Yes.
On April 18th through May 5th, state, local, and federal organizations alike are planning for Operation Gotham Shield, major nuclear detonation drill. During this exercise, 4 nuclear devices, 2 of which are rendered quote-unquote safe during the U.S. Department of Defense Vital Archer exercise, and 1 successful 10-kiloton detonation in the New York City, New Jersey area, along with 1 smaller detonation on the U.S.-Canadian border, are to take place. And you got 10 government agencies involved in this exercise. So, the more people know about it, the less likely it is it'll go hot. But you just never know these days. No,
you don't really know. And again, we need to remember that when the Nuclear Emergency Search Team was doing their baseline maps over New York, they discovered that the Israeli embassy there is radioactive. It's a hotspot. And, of course, Israel won't explain and will not allow inspections. It's sovereign Israeli territory. But if you go back and you look at the history of Israel's procurement of nuclear weapons, some of their first-generation uranium fission bombs were built with material smuggled out of the United States from a company called NUMEC, which was eventually shut down because they kept missing uranium. They were losing uranium all over the place. And it would have been very easy for Israel to smuggle only some of that uranium back to Israel for the bombs and keep enough in the U.S. for a single device for use in the future. Because for a uranium fission bomb, it's actually very easy to build one. It's basically a pipe with 2 subcritical masses of uranium at each end. You slap them together, it goes bang. That's the secret of the uranium fission bomb. The hard part is getting the fissionables, and we know Israel has that.
Yeah, I guess time will tell. Hopefully we'll skate by this one. This doesn't do much for my heart condition, But the good news, though, I heard that Target, because of their ridiculous transgender bathroom stand, I think it lost $15 billion last year. Is that true?
They lost a lot. I don't know the exact number, but it was a major, major hit. And I think the board of directors ought to think about voting their CEO out for this ridiculous mixing of retail with political. But it has cost Target huge numbers of customers. People aren't going there. They don't feel that they can go to the restroom in safety. And we saw Starbucks took a major hit because of some of their policies. I'm kind of glad it happened. I don't know the exact number. But I think these retail corporations need to understand their business is retail, not trying to be part of the propaganda apparatus to mold the public opinion. It certainly backfired. People did not buy into this idea that a guy who claims he's a woman inside should be able to go into the ladies' restroom and or shower room and all the rest of that. That did not work.
Hey, thanks for taking the call. I'll get up there and let's get back to your good show. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much here, and we're going to close the phone lines probably for the rest of the show here because I've got a bunch of stuff to talk about. Now, interestingly enough, in the first week of April, the DEA was being questioned by a House Judiciary Committee about exactly how they're trying to keep drugs off the street. And the DEA admitted that they're actually having some of their informants sell drugs on the streets. The excuse is that they're trying to find the bigger fish. Well, they're going in the wrong direction because the bigger fish are upstream, not on the street level. But maybe somebody in the DEA is working with the CIA to get the drugs back out there onto the street, because when you want to destabilize a country, the best way to do it is to get them addicted to drugs. The British, I don't know if they intended to do this or not, but when the British won their war with China over their right to sell opium to the Chinese people, it eventually led to the collapse of the imperial government and the rise of communism. We know how well that fast and furious gun walking thing worked out as well. Now, Tesla is recalling most of the cars it sold last year. It's a voluntary recall of 53,000 vehicles out of a total of 76,000 that were sold. It's a huge fraction. Now, it's a minor issue. Apparently, there is a defective part in the parking brake that could keep the brake from releasing. And so the recall is basically go on in, and they're going to install a new part in the parking brake so you can safely release it. So it's low key, but if you have a Tesla, you're probably going to get a recall notice on that. Speaking of electric cars, the numbers are starting to come on in on all these federal subsidies for corn, ethanol, and other corn-based biofuels. The numbers really aren't looking very good. Basically, after 30 years of federal backing, corn ethanol subsidies scattered throughout the federal tax code and Farm Bill energy title should be eliminated because they were supposed to achieve energy independence, but they really didn't work on out. Because, first of all, production of corn ethanol is not carbon neutral when you include the CO2 produced during the processing of the corn into the ethanol. The other problem is that ethanol has much less energy than an equivalent amount of gasoline. So you have to buy and burn more of it to accomplish the same amount of work with your motor vehicle or tractor or truck or forklift or whatever you're putting it in. And finally, for older cars, ethanol is dissolving the fuel systems. The soft components of the fuel systems, they're not designed to work with ethanol. The newer flex fuel cars will, but if you have an older car like we do, we have to go to a special gas station that will sell ethanol-free fuel. And that's where we get our car filled up. Now then, here's an interesting little article. This is coming out of the New Zealand Herald, and it's talking about how New Zealand scientists have helped discover incredible new submarine volcanoes in the Pacific Ocean, some of them rising up to 2.5 kilometers from the sea floor. And the discoveries were made by a team of international scientists who've just returned from a 6-week voyage probing the volcanic chematic arc around 1,000 kilometers northwest of the North Island. This is the area where the El Nino current emerges. And it emerges as a point source and then spreads as it flows to the east until it hits the Americas. And it underscores something I've been saying about all these claims from the carbonazis about how we're warming the ocean and the sea levels are going to rise. Nobody knows how many active volcanoes and thermal vents are on the floors of the ocean. And unless you have that and are able to subtract out the heat added to the oceans by geothermal activity, then you have nothing but a wild guess as to what the human contribution is. You haven't corrected for all available factors. Let's talk about what's going on here in Hawaii. As you probably are aware, I've been talking for a long time about this light rail project we have here. It is a boondoggle with a capital Boon, and basically this entire rail system reaches a total of 20 miles, which is along the south shore of Oahu, from Honolulu out to Ko'olina, where the Disney resort is. The initial estimate for cost was $5.28 billion. It is now estimated by the time it's done, it will run $10 billion or $500 million per mile, the most expensive track in the world. Now, this whole light rail was sold on the idea that it would reduce the current level of traffic congestion dramatically. However, the final environmental impact statement concluded that rail would reduce traffic congestion by less than 2%, and that traffic congestion will be worse in the future with the rail than what it is today without the rail. Currently, Honolulu does not have the funds to complete the 20-mile system. They're at least $3 billion short and 6 years behind schedule. And how did this happen? Well, do you remember the Alaska's infamous Bridge to Nowhere, part of Sarah Palin's legacy? Because the project was driven more by politics than by objective engineering and planning. Our former governor, Cayetano, is out there telling Trump, you might as well cancel the federal rail funding. This is never going to get finished. And remember, we've already talked about how they're going to have to replace all of the rail cars they bought because of a design defect. The frames are already cracking, and they haven't even carried passengers yet. These cars are all built with aluminum. They have 4 extruded aluminum I-beams that run lengthwise, around which the rest of the car is built, and they're discovering cracks in them. The little insulator pads on which the tracks actually rest are not bearing the load. They're already having to be replaced along the first 11 miles of the track. And they discovered that the columns that will hold up the actual stations are not up to the task. The contract for those columns and braces was signed before they really understood just how heavy those stations were going to be. Now they're going to have to go back and refit those. If we didn't have enough problems there, apparently a lot of veterans are very upset over the new Hawaii Veterans Affairs chief. And basically it's Jennifer Gutowski, and they don't think she's going to be a person to fix all of the problems that we're dealing with in the VA affair, because apparently she was caught trying to falsify the medical wait times and conceal 13 deaths when she was in charge of Arizona. It is a raw deal for our serving veterans, whether you agree with the wars or not, and I certainly do not. We as a nation do owe a debt to those who put on the uniform, keep their oaths, keep their promises, and suffer greatly because of it. And the attitude of the government seems to be just put them on hold until they die. They're costing us too much money. Now, Bill Gates, who apparently is already lobbying Donald Trump to drop the Vaccine Safety Commission, is warning that terrorists could weaponize smallpox. Well, actually, that's already been done. The U.S. and other countries have already weaponized smallpox. But apparently Gates is out there ramping up the fear to try and sell us all smallpox vaccine. Now then, apparently a Romanian spammer is in part behind a sudden surge in fake Twitter followers in recent weeks. And what it is most Twitter accounts, some of their followers are going to be fakes, and they exist to simply dump porn ads and other things onto the various Twitter feeds. And Twitter doesn't seem to want to do anything about it, but they've tracked this down to this Romanian spammer who's doing this. Now, a little bit of good news, and you're going to have to know what you're doing to use this. But over in Computer World, they're reporting on how Luke Jennings of security firm Countercept has written a Python script that will test for NSA spyware. They're looking at all of this Vault 7 leaks coming on out from WikiLeaks, and they've written a script that will test your computer for NSA spyware. And it's currently estimated that the NSA has spyware on at least 100,000 computers here in the United States of America. But it does take some programming skill to use, some familiarity with Python. If you don't know what you're doing, then you probably need to make friends with a geek somewhere. Up in Canada, the Public Health Agency has confirmed 27 cases of E. coli 0121 infections across 5 Canadian provinces since November of last year. They're linked to flour produced by Ardent Mills Canada. And 7 of the outbreak victims were hospitalized but are recovering. No deaths have been reported. Now, E. coli 0121 is a Shiga toxin-producing strain of E. coli, and it has been responsible for outbreaks associated with flour, frozen foods, and raw clover sprouts. So if you're up there in Canada, be aware that I presume there is a recall for these various products from Ardent Mills. Check with your supermarket management, make sure that you're getting the good stuff here. Now, let's get on back to vaccines here. A lot of people are congratulating Fox News for actually having an open discussion on the questions of vaccines. Remember, we were talking about how Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was interviewed on Fox News, and he said, this is only the second time in 10 years I've been allowed to talk about this on TV, which shows you the monetary and political might of the vaccine industry. And there is a question. Unfortunately, corporate media is never going to deal with it. They are heavily dependent on advertising from the pharmaceutical companies. But apparently, up in Scandinavia, they've done another study in which they're showing that infants given the DTP vaccine are 5 to 10 times more susceptible to dying in what is loosely called sudden infant death syndrome. So there's very clearly a connection there. All right, we're going to take a break. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And a listener just sent in a confirmation that Target did lose $15 billion over this transgender bathroom nonsense. You know, something has occurred to me. I don't know how universal this is, but at our shopping mall down at the bottom of the hill, the restrooms come in threes. There's the male, there's the female, and then there's the so-called family restroom, which is non-gender. And people are confused about what they are. They could just use that one, I think. Anyway, getting on back to vaccines here. Story that came out of Ben Swan, and it's a bit of a flashback, but he was looking at CDC corruption following the revelation that the CDC's own vaccine autism study was a fraud. The scientist in charge came on out and said, we cherry-picked the data. This is now being backed up by David Newberry, who's the former CDC chief of the immunization branch 45 years, who's basically out there saying that early on, the CDC studied the links between vaccines and autism, and every time they found a link, they would change the experimental protocol to hide the link, and they did it, in his estimation, 17 different times, where they were checking to see if there was a link between vaccines and autism. They kept finding it. They kept changing the experimental protocol. And finally, William Shatner, who is not really an anti-vaxxer, but apparently came on out and said that, you know, there is a legitimate question that should be asked, at which point vaccine bullies, if you will, jumped all over him on social media. I think we should set phasers to punch in the face. Now, thousands are suing Merck for their shingles vaccine, Zostavax, because it's actually causing shingles. It's another case of a vaccine that's actually causing the illness it's supposed to protect you from. But it makes money, and money is good in the United States. Everybody is so desperate for money, they're willing to do almost anything. Now the studies come on out showing that statin side effects outweigh its benefits. This is Professor Sharif Sultan, president of the International Society for Vascular Surgery. He says people are taking this drug to prevent a problem, and they're creating a disaster. And here is where the profit motive shows up again. The London Times recently revealed that one of the world's leading drug companies created artificial shortages by destroying supplies of life-saving cancer drugs in order to drive the price up. Oh, we have to charge you this much. There's a shortage out there. Where'd the shortage come from? Well, we were just pouring it down the sinks. all driven by the money. And by the way, over in arstechnica.com, we have this article, 107 cancer papers have now been retracted due to peer review fraud. This is from the journal Tumor Biology. And they discovered that the authors of these papers faked the peer review process. There's our music. Time for me to get on out of here and do the Jim Goddard Show. We will be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Please take what you learn here, share it with everyone that you know. We're in a fight to head off World War III. We're in a fight to protect the health and lives of our children from this out-of-control medical monster. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.